we have all sorts of people joining in. I guess maybe I should wait until the numbers stop moving for before launching in. All right. We've got 155 participants, so I'm going to call it a quorum and get started. Welcome, everybody. I'm so pleased to have you all here. Partners, grantees, and other people in the Jessie Ball duPont Fund ecosystem. One of the pieces of feedback we got from you in the past year as we did our listening tour and our survey was that you wanted us, the fund, to stay in closer touch with you. This is the first of many more webinars that we hope to hold with you to make it a little bit clearer where we're coming from and to give us an opportunity about where you each are in your journeys. So this is a webinar about communications. And I'm very pleased to introduce the Dalton Agency. They are the premier communications firm here in Jacksonville and beyond. And we are fortunate to be one of the clients. Next slide. We are joined, therefore, today by Michael Muntz, the president of the Dalton Agency, Scott Merritt, the VP for Media Relations, Maddie Milne, our account supervisor, and Hanne Volkers, the social media manager for Dalton Agency. Now, just a little bit of couple words of introduction before we launch into the meat of our discussion. I expect that COVID-19 has vastly changed how you work. Certainly it's changed how we work. Most, if not all of you, are probably watching this webinar from home. Some of you can still work. Others of you are not able to support your clients or your partners, and you're not able to meet your funders in the ways that were most effective before we all had to stay at home. Now, communications has to shoulder the whole burden of keeping those relationships with your clients, donors, funding partners, volunteers, and staff. Nonprofit work is a relationship business, which is why active and targeted communications with each of those groups is so important. And not only is communications having to bear the weight of all this, but you're communicating in a very different environment. It's more crowded. Not only is my inbox full of communications from nonprofits, that's normal. But now I've got requests from businesses with GoFundMe links for their furloughed workers, or requests that I make sure I do deliveries and takeout and tip the people well. And, you know, it's simply because it's new that stands out for me more than perhaps the communications that I'm used to getting from so many nonprofits. So the goal of this webinar is to provide insight on how you communicate effectively and what best practices might be for nonprofit organizations during this COVID-19 pandemic. And this is just one way we hope to give you support. There are other ways, of course, that we are partnering with you, but this is all in the interest of us making it together through this. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michael.
Great. Thank you, Mari, and thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Before we get into the presentation, we'd like to tell you a little bit about us, because a lot of you haven't had an opportunity to meet us, and we haven't had a chance to meet you, but through the fund, we are very, very honored to be here today with you and appreciate the time. As you'll see here on the capabilities slide, we have a variety of in-house capabilities that can help in these times, but also when we are living in a normal world, as we would like to say. Our agency has been built organically over time. We have been in business since 1989, serving clients around the country. Next slide, please. This just gives you a sampling of our nonprofit world clients that we work very closely with. I myself am very involved in philanthropy, and we brought that line of thinking to the agency quite a few years ago. We've worked with a lot of nonprofits, both at the very small community-based level as well as at the national level. We pride ourselves in the ability to understand the world of nonprofits and how to help them, no matter how large or small they may be. The essence of the world of communication still applies. The strategy around that still applies, and sometimes the tactics may be large or small depending on the organization, but you'd be surprised. There are some small organizations we work with that like to put on some very large tactical communication programs, and we're able to adapt and work with all of them. So this just gives you a quick snapshot of who we are and what we do. And from here, I'm going to talk about the agenda. Next slide. So let's first talk about why communications in the age of COVID-19. Mari was great about starting to touch on that, and we're going to dive further into it through this presentation. Mitigating communications challenges during this time of crisis. We all know that we're experiencing a lot of challenges. We normally do in the world of nonprofits and what you do on a day-to-day basis, but COVID-19 has changed that dramatically. And we're going to talk about some best practices, and then we're going to get into the part that I think may be actually most appealing to a lot of you, and that's Q&A. So we'll try and limit our presentation as best we can so we can get into a very healthy dialogue for the balance of the program. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Maddie Milne, who is going to walk through why communications now. And one point I'd like to make is that we're talking today on April 14th about communications, but really we're thinking about not only how you're handling it today, this week, or next week, but how do you need to start thinking today about May, June, July, and beyond, even into 2021. We don't have a set time for when the country is going to quote unquote turn back on, but we do know at some point that's going to start to happen. And we also know that things are going to be different through the balance of this year and going into next. So we'll talk about all of that as I kick it over to Maddie. Thank you very much again for joining us today.
Okay, this is Scott. I just want to, I'm going to take over this next section here. I just need the video. There we go. There's the video. Sorry about that little technical glitch. So to get started, we do want to underscore how some of the traditional ways you've strived to keep on top of mind to your various audiences have worked, such as face-to-face interactions, planned events, all of which have been completely disrupted, leaving communications as one of the only ways your organization can remain visible to your stakeholders. In times of crisis like what we're experiencing right now, it will become quickly apparent how important being able to communicate with your stakeholders really is. Clear and concise communications to all of your key audiences, many of which are listed here. Some, you may have some others, but communications with them will help you sustain, survive, and even in many cases thrive during such an unprecedented health emergency. It's more important than ever to make sure that we're communicating appropriately with all of the audiences. If you're changing the way you're doing business, for example, many of you may be experiencing canceling or postponing events, switching service delivery to virtual and online. It's important to let folks know that you're seeking ways to address these service disruptions, and it's critical that everybody involved knows how these steps will affect them and those others that you serve. We know one of the major challenges that many of you are facing is lost fundraising opportunities. Effective communications will help to ensure that all of your audiences know the latest details about rescheduled events. They also will help bring to life whatever new creative approaches you're embarking on. And by delivering your information regularly and appropriately, communications will ensure that all updated information about your objectives reaches those in your universe. There's also a strong likelihood that the services you deliver have been interrupted in a pretty profound way. It's critical that everybody in your service delivery network knows not only when and how those interruptions are happening, but also what your plans are to maintain service levels for those who rely on your organization. In many cases, the challenge of doing so is magnified by more limited staff resources and an inability to maintain a robust volunteer program, particularly as facilities are temporarily closed and most staff are now working remotely. The danger is potentially lower engagement levels, which can have a ripple effect on the future of the organization, but carefully crafted communications can help maintain a strong presence by strategically targeting audiences that are important for you to engage with, sharing important, relevant updates that matter, and very importantly, meeting your audiences where they are, which, as we covered in many cases, will be at home. Another key aspect of what we do with communications, particularly in a case like what's happening right now, is influencing policymaking. With policymaking happening at a more rapid pace than ever and in a way that can significantly impact nonprofits, it's also important to be part of that conversation. There are a variety of communication methods that we can employ that help to deliver your critical perspective, including media relations, social media, which in many ways today is the most efficient method, email campaigns, and even paid media. All of these communication methods can help you deliver your message in a highly effective way with a carefully crafted message. The objective is to influence policy by communicating directly with those decision makers and also engage your base to advocate for you at the state, local, and even national levels. Here's where I'll hand it to Maddie to discuss mitigating some of the communications challenges we're facing.
Thanks, Scott. So now that we have talked about the different challenges you are facing, let's discuss how you can change your current communications to better meet those challenges head on. So 6 weeks ago, you might have taken the following approach to your communications planning. You identified the various audiences you wanted to reach and laid out the goals and objectives you wanted to achieve. You drafted key messages for internal and external audiences, and then you adapted those messages for your various communications channels. You got into a steady cadence of sharing news and information on multiple platforms, and then you routinely pulled analytics to monitor effectiveness and you adjusted as needed. So while these very traditional steps are all still effective, in recent weeks, they have had to change at a breakneck pace to meet the needs of today. And more so, you've needed to evolve your one-way communications efforts to be a more fluid, two-way conversation that is both interactive and responsive. So now let's talk through a few ways you should be changing your communications if you haven't already done so, starting with your messaging. You will need to adapt your messages during a crisis while also remaining true to your overall mission and brand. You can look to do this by being open and honest about how COVID is impacting your organization. For donors and the community, you want to paint this picture. If you were not here, what would happen to the populations you serve? Whether that's your parishioners, students, the elderly, animals, or the homeless, whoever it is. You want to clearly highlight how your organization is pivoting to bring your usual services and programs online, or if virtual programming isn't an option for you, how are you continuing to serve in a safe and appropriate manner? Ask for help. One good example we've seen recently is the Jacksonville Zoo. They make a compelling case for financial support from the community because they have so many animals to care for. And you'll see on the screen a really nice News for Jack story with a great headline all about financial support. But consider including more than just financial contributions. People right now, they are looking for ways to help, even if they can't afford to give money. So this is a great opportunity to appeal to new volunteers or drive user-generated content on your social media pages. For example, some nursing homes have started an Adopt a Grandparent program to keep seniors engaged during social distancing. So as much as you can, stay positive and calm in all of your messages and overall tone. You want to inspire hope and collaboration, not fear. And please, if you are sharing information with your audiences, health information, I should say, only share accurate and factual information from trusted sources like the CDC or the World Health Organization. Speaking of messaging, I want to highlight a really important nuance when it comes to sharing your story during COVID. One of the pillars of effective communications is always to proactively promote your organization's mission or good news. But be cognizant of striking the right balance between sharing newsworthy information with your stakeholders and appearing opportunistic. This is even more important when talking about how your organization is meeting the critical needs of your community during a crisis. So on the screen, for example, I shared a nice media story about how Jacksonville-based nonprofit Rethreaded is partnering with local credit unions to make masks for caregivers. A local hospital is providing all of the materials needed to sew and manufacture the masks, while the local credit unions are covering the labor costs to have Rethreaded's constituents who are survivors of human trafficking sew them. This community collaboration is exactly the type of beneficial opportunity you want to share, whether you are pitching it to a local reporter or sharing on your website's blog and social media pages. All of this drives audiences, including new donors and volunteers, to your website and mission. So one phrase I know you've all seen a million times right now is "these are uncertain times." When it comes to COVID-19, all businesses, organizations, and nonprofits are operating using rapidly changing information. Even the masters said they are targeting certain dates later this fall in November, but they can't be sure. So we know some organizations out there may err on the side of not communicating for fear the information they put out there will just change tomorrow. But the truth is, if you aren't communicating information and updates, even if it's tentative, you lose the opportunity to have your voice heard and you'll lose your audiences quickly. Right now, we are working 24/7 to keep our clients' messages updated using the latest expert information, while also ensuring we have a steady stream of content to share, even if it has to change the next day or the next hour. Another tactic I want to highlight is the need to rethink your postponed or canceled events, programs, and services. If you haven't already, now is the time to think outside the box and find new and creative ways to engage your audiences. So first, how are you adapting the in-person programs and services you typically offer to reach people where they are, which is at home? While this can be hard for some nonprofits who operate on face-to-face interaction, there are ways to bring many of these services online. Just look at the churches streaming their services and Bible studies to museums launching interactive tours of their exhibits. Also, instead of just canceling those planned fundraising events, how can you evolve these major initiatives to take place virtually? So one example that I wanted to share is about the Jacksonville Humane Society's recent Mutt March. That's one of their major fundraising events, and I think they have turned this into a major success story for them. The Humane Society decided to make their April 11th Pet 5K and Festival a virtual experience by encouraging the entire community to still register, to still participate, but it was live online events, and they posted photos of their animals on social media. The Humane Society worked quickly to change the overall structure of the event, communicate changes proactively and in a positive tone with their audiences, and were still able to meet their $25,000 fundraising goal. And finally, just explore partnerships with others and look for opportunities to adapt your resources to meet growing needs. That Rethreaded example I shared earlier is a really great example of this. So now I'm going to hand it back over to Michael.
Great. Thank you, Maddie. As we're preparing for a post-COVID era, I mentioned earlier about the need to look beyond today and to plan for what's next. And part of what we want to talk about is doing just that. We don't want to just get mired down in what's going on in today's world, but think about what we need to be doing in the future. Next slide, please. So some key takeaways as you start to think about this is, what are those transitional programs and services that you can start to bring online and that may stay actually online going forward? How can you start to adapt today to be an online and in-person service when we're able to have that opportunity? Website changes, social media changes. If you don't have a strong social media presence, we suggest that you start to think about that today and not just discontinue that when the COVID-19 pandemic issue is over, but to have that going on and on. So think about how you can bring it to life today, but have it go on into the future. Proactively communicate, why you're meeting the new challenges and the immediate needs. There are a lot of different groups that you need to be thinking about talking with and talking to and engaging with. Engagement is a key word here. A lot of nonprofits and for-profits that we're working with are forgetting the fact that when someone posts online, that you need to engage with that organization or that person, as opposed to just reading the posts and looking at them as just messages coming in. You need to have messages going back out. So engagement is a key way to talk to your constituents and also build maybe an even broader audience and message. Brainstorming creative ways to come back with plans. Maddie was just talking about March. We've seen them going on in Atlanta with Susan Komen. We've seen them going on in Nashville and in Los Angeles, different ways to have planned events come into the online world, and exploring new partnerships and have a plan again to move forward. A lot of organizations have ignored having a crisis plan. I think now is a really good time to not only work through the crisis that we're dealing with today, but to go back and think through with your board how you as an organization can develop a crisis plan to make sure it's ready, it's rehearsed, and that everybody in the organization, both the staff and the volunteers, as well as your board and leadership, understand what their roles are during a crisis. Now is the time to think, did I actually have a crisis plan? And maybe you had one that was sitting on the shelf for a decade and you never really had to use it. You were very fortunate. Maybe you were an organization that didn't think a crisis plan was ever necessary. They are. Today's world is proving that. And just because this will eventually pass and we go back to whatever normal is, and we all know that's going to be different, please don't forget about having a proper crisis plan in place so that you are prepared for whatever may happen in the future. Next slide, please. So we want to share with you some best practices that we think apply to you. And again, we'll get into some really good Q&A as we go forward, but Hannah is going to take it from here and talk about nonprofit best practices.
Yes, thank you, Michael. Our first example, next slide, please, Maddie. Our first example is something that we work on with our client, the First Coast YMCA, which is the local YMCA here in Northeast Florida, with just under 20 locations across Greater Jacksonville. This is really an example of what we touched on earlier, thinking creatively on how to translate your services into a virtual offering. In this example, with an important role for social media. So as safety concerns around COVID-19 started to escalate, the YMCA started seeing less foot traffic at their locations. So we quickly pivoted on social media to start offering a daily Facebook Live workout class with one of their fitness instructors. And it was really aimed for those people who weren't comfortable with coming into the locations anymore. But then a few days later, the YMCA just had to close all their locations. So we expanded that offering into 5 Facebook Live sessions to really meet people at those different moments throughout the day when they would regularly work out, whether that's really early in the morning at 7, right before work at 9, during lunchtime at 11, or after work at 6. In the afternoon at 3 p.m., we also started offering kids activities to really bridge the gap for local kids and parents here in our area after the electronic homeschooling ended. This is really a way for us to keep our audience and the community at large engaged and help them stay healthy while they're at home, and helps us reach our different audiences with these different offerings, ranging from kids to seniors. At the same time, when we started really transitioning to all virtual, we also launched a website hub on the YMCA's website with all these virtual services. It really grouped all resources from the Facebook Live classes to partner resources to third-party resources to YouTube videos that we had pre-recorded. You know, of course, some people were initially upset that the YMCA had to close their locations, but we've really seen nothing but positive reactions to these virtual services that we started offering. We've even already talked with the client about continuing some of it. And, you know, some of the reactions that we're seeing are typical, are people saying that they love seeing the faces of their favorite instructor, but some people are even saying that they're trying out new classes that they were too afraid to try out before, whether that's yoga or just a really high intensity class that they didn't want to try out in a group before, but now they can try it just from the comfort of their home by following it online. I want to mention another example here too. This is something that we're still currently developing with a local church here in Jacksonville. And this plan includes Facebook Live prayer sessions, weekly Facebook Live worship music videos, and a larger Facebook Live session to stream the Sunday worship. Next slide, please. So as soon as the YMCA had to close all their branches, we started quickly using our media relations creatively as an opportunity to further promote the YMCA as a service provider and really for the community at large, not just existing YMCA members. We not only promoted those virtual services I talked about, the YMCA also responded to a need from the medical community to provide emergency childcare for medical workers and other essential employees. So they opened 6 branches to start offering that. And by facilitating TV, print, online, and radio interviews, we really helped position the YMCA as a critical provider of those important services here in our area and with our virtual programs to keep everyone healthy. Next slide. In addition to those Facebook Live capabilities that I'm talking about, which you also have on Instagram, of course, another really good capability on social media is it's the perfect time to connect with your audience and find various ways to encourage them to share content, not just you. This is something that we call user-generated content. This can be really simple. It can be as simple as the example you see on the left and in the middle on the bottom, which is something that we're doing with the YMCA again, in the Facebook groups for each location. Users are being encouraged to share post-workout photos or to share the workout that they did that particular day so others can do it too. In the work for the local church I mentioned earlier, we're also including Bible readings as Facebook videos where people are being asked in advance to share their favorite Bible passages so that the ones that are being read in the video are really all sourced by the community. We also wanted to note a larger scale example that we noticed online. The Episcopal Church asked people to send in videos of them singing or playing an instrument, and they edited it all together in one big video to celebrate Easter. We thought this was really neat, and it was a national, international scale, so that's just a large scale example of how that works. The example on the right is something that we worked on with our client, America's Warrior Partnership, for their program called Mission Roll Call. This social media campaign encourages veterans and their families to connect with each other by sharing videos of how they're coping with COVID-19. So, and they're encouraged to use this specific hashtag MRCBeALeader, so that other veterans can really just click that hashtag on the different channels where they're deploying this, so that they can scroll through other people's experience and really learn from each other. And then with that, I'm gonna kick it over to Scott to talk about Easter Seals, our next example.
Thanks, Hannah. Yeah, for Easter Seals, which is America's oldest and largest nonprofit providing services and supports for Americans with disabilities, we launched a communications campaign that included influencing federal policy and legislation, and also maintaining awareness of the brand by offering subject matter experts for appropriate topics. What you see on your screen here are just a few examples of editorials that were published for Easter Seals as things changed on what literally was a minute-by-minute basis. It's slowed a bit to basically an hour-by-hour basis that things are changing now, but to give an example of the speed at which things are moving right now, We actually developed 3 or 4 other editorials that we wound up having to scrap because things changed in the hours between development and delivery. On the top left, you'll see a template letter that we developed for Easter Seal's 68 affiliates around the nation to send to their local leaders and lawmakers, both recognizing them for their efforts and outlining what was needed next. On the bottom left, you'll see an editorial that was published in The Hill from an Easter Seals subject matter expert that shared expertise and insights about the front line's healthcare needs affecting caregiving. Caregiving is an important service provided by Easter Seals through its 68 affiliates. This ensured that Easter Seals had a voice in the national discussion, and it maintained awareness of Easter Seals as an important national organization serving a community in need. On the bottom right-hand side of your screen, you'll see an editorial that was published in the Wall Street Journal. This editorial, which was penned by Angela Williams, the CEO of Easter Seals, positioned the 101-year-old organization as the principal thought leader focused on advocacy and policy for national nonprofits. The catalyst for this editorial, as I'm sure many of you are aware, was the fact that nonprofits were not initially included in the federal stimulus package. It quickly became evident to us that someone had to outline the financial impact of the economic downturn on nonprofits and pair it with a call to legislative action. The story happened to be published the day before the Congressional CARES Act vote, which, as you are aware, wound up including significant provisions to support nonprofits. Next slide. We also expanded the messaging to a paid media campaign as a way to promote Easter Seals with a call to action for support in the print advertisements you see on the screen. These are set to be published in the Wall Street Journal, and they carry through with the same overall messaging. Next slide. So moving on to Susan G. Komen of Greater Atlanta, we had several objectives for this nonprofit. Number one, we had to move the date of their biggest annual fundraiser, the More Than Pink Walk. We also had to announce a $75,000 investment by Komen to support a fund that helps underprivileged populations with breast cancer treatment. And we also had to help them launch a new COVID-19 action fund with a clear call to action for support. We employed a variety of methods to do all of this in a very narrow window of time, including issuing press releases, letters, postcards, and emails to donors, particularly to reach some folks who may not have online access. Providing op-ed submissions to local newspapers from the CEO of the organization. We've done heavy social media promotion targeted to those who are interested in this particular mission. We developed blog posts for the organization to share out through all of their channels. And we also helped to develop some video content to deliver their messages from the CEO directly in a highly authentic way. So with that, I think we're going to move to our Q&A section.
Yes, we are. Thanks, Scott. So I'll be moderating this section and assigning questions to people on our team. The first question is from Peter Wallace. It says, like everyone, I seem to be getting bombarded by communications, email, social media, etc., from businesses and nonprofits about what they're doing in light of the pandemic. Is there a danger in over-communicating at this time, and where is the balance? This is a great question and something we have personally dealt with our clients. I'm going to kick it over to Michael, and I think Maddie, after that, you can touch on a specific example that we experienced with a client as well.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for this great question. We've been working very closely with a lot of the folks that we are engaged with to deal exactly with this. And I will tell you, I'm also subjected to a lot of this. And I think there is a balance between providing good, engaging information and communication and having something that comes off as too sales-oriented or too self-serving. I will tell you that a lot of the groups that are starting to get some backlash are law firms, professional accounting firms, and others that keep putting in our inboxes emails that are basically disguised as sales tools to try and get you to hire them to help understand maybe the new federal legislation or deal with accounting issues, et cetera. And so we have to strike a balance. There is such thing as bombarding, but also the communications that we focus on is how you engage with your audiences, how you can partner with other groups, like we showed a couple of examples, and communicate interesting things, and how you can provide a necessary service like the Y, the churches are doing, other organizations. So you do have to make sure that as you're reading any kind of communication, that you think about it in terms of how you're going to react if it gets into your inbox. And also, there's no rule of thumb. There's not we should talk to our community 1 time a week, 3 times a week, 5 times a week, every day, every other day. It really is a case-by-case basis, and it depends on the content. And content is going to be king here. So as you're thinking about communication, how are you going to bring something relevant to your audience that they're going to appreciate and not just want to hit that delete button on? And others may want to chime in as well.
Yeah, I'll chime in quickly there. This is really a good question, and a lot of our clients are grappling with this. You want to make sure that you're not sending an email every single day about what you're doing to, sanitize the location or to keep everyone safe. So there's definitely a balance. One thing that we have encouraged some of our clients to do is, as long as you have a hub somewhere, whether that's through an app or your website, where all of the pertinent information lives. And so when there is something that's breaking that you need to get out there, you can use those closer communication channels like email or like pushing it out on social media. But if it's not something that needs to be out there immediately, we recommend just having it in one home base, if you will, whether that's an app or a website. And so if people do get questions, if you do get questions on social media, you can direct them there instead of sending out an all membership database email.
That's a really good point that Maddie makes too about social media, is having that central hub, whether it's your app or your website, that really helps you answer any questions that you might get on social media, because you can direct people to where they can find all the answers, and it will help them next time they have a question. They'll probably go to that hub first before coming to you on social media. And then to close out on social media too, it is okay to post more often than you would before. Where if you posted 2 times a week or 1 time a week before, it is okay to be posting every day, as long as, like Michael said, content is king, and make sure you have a message to share. Don't just share stuff to share and to keep your audience engaged. Make sure that your content is good, and then there's no risk in sharing 5 times a week on social media. Everyone's cadence is different this time, whether it is less because you have less to communicate, or whether it is more because you have more to communicate every day. For the YMCA specifically, we used to post every other day or once every other day, and now we're posting 6 times a day because we're bringing people live services. So it's totally normal to up your cadence on social media. All right, let's move on to the next question. This one is from Colleen Urfer. It says, do you have any suggestions for those of us with supporters who don't have email or internet? This is a great question, something we've dealt with too for the Y with seniors. Maddie, you want to take this one?
Sure. I'll start, then I know everyone on the team probably has other insights on this as well. Really a good question. I would suggest 3 things to consider. One is the power of picking up the phone. They do have phone lines. We are seeing a lot of senior citizens, maybe they aren't as adept on getting on the internet as other people younger than them are. And so the Y has made a big push to call over 10,000 of their senior citizen members. Now that is a lot of time on the phone, but you can't underestimate the importance of just picking up the phone and calling those people. A second thing I would consider is also direct mail. We probably used to say, I don't know about direct mail, that's really viable, but now people are at home. So I think that's something that you should consider if it's a viable option for you. And third, I think this is where public-private partnerships could come in. You know, we hear about schools partnering with organizations to put Wi-Fi on school buses to bring that into a community so that students can continue to learn. So I think reaching out to those bigger communications who, you know what, they might have the money to help you do something like this, and they're also looking for some good PR right now. So that's a good community collaboration that I would consider looking into.
I wanted to just add on the mailing idea. We are starting to see old-fashioned post office mail come back. And also we're seeing in smaller groups, maybe where there's not as many, maybe you've got a board you need to communicate with. We're seeing Federal Express and overnight packages come back. We're designing some easy to read materials that are adjustable. One of the things that you need to remember is because direct mail has been sort of a forgotten art, there is a science to making sure that the message is well communicated and that you're not sending a 3-page letter, but you're sending also content that, just like you would on social media or online, is condensed and informative and easy to understand and read. And so keep that in mind. If you do switch over to the direct mail world, a lot of people we've had to pull back because they thought, well, if it's mail, then people will take the time to read it. And in essence, they won't. They will actually get about halfway through. So don't bury the lead. If you go to a direct mail campaign, have, again, something short, concise. Oversized postcards are a great way to use the old-fashioned, if you will, direct mail cycle. So I just want to make that point as well.
I'll tag on to that. And I touched on this when I was just talking about our example with Komen Atlanta. Part of the campaign that they've launched to reach some of their folks who don't have access to the internet is a direct mail campaign, and in the form of a postcard. And so what they did was they're thinking through a creative way to execute that. And because part of the message that they're trying to deliver is the fact that they're moving their biggest fundraising event, which is an in-person event, they're thinking through a kind of like a postcard wish you were here type theme, and sharing all the appropriate information about what their initiatives are right now with those who would have otherwise participated in person and who still may later on in the year once the event is rescheduled.
All right, great. Thanks, everyone. Let's move to the next question from Sister Hannah from the other side. What if we have a very poor internet connection and can't live stream our services? I'll answer this for social media really quickly. You know, there's no, if you can't, it's okay not to live stream. You could also pre-record the videos. You know, you can pre-record Bible readings, and you can still, like I mentioned earlier, really go in big on that user-generated content. Ask people to share things. Ask them to share their favorite Bible passages, and then maybe you just put them together in a collage. It can be a photo. It doesn't have to be a video. There's various different ways, if internet connection is a problem, that you can be doing and putting content on social media to engage your parishioners. And then I'm going to immediately add another question from Father DeRosa. It says, we are a tiny parish with a very limited tech ability, and we've been trying to have fireside chats on Facebook, but it is not the best quality video or sound. To whom do I reach out for tech assistance on a low budget that is being cut in half due to the pandemic? I can't talk about the tech assistance, but I can again say that if you can't do video, that is okay. People will understand, but also communicate about that. We have said, you know, be open and honest, communicate what you're going through, that your budget is cut in half, and then find other ways to engage your audience. Do the photo collage. There's a lot of different things that you can do with just photos or even just text on your Facebook channels. People are, you know, reading a lot this time and are scrolling through Facebook. So even if your post doesn't necessarily have an image, which usually is really a best practice, it can still perform. And there's really different ways that you can be doing things without video, without live. So I'll kick it over to Michael. I see him nodding, so I think he might want to add something here.
No, I was actually just agreeing. It's a great point. We worked with a group yesterday who had that issue in some rural areas where they did not have proper internet. So we pushed them to do just some sliding photos and then some content at the bottom, and it worked out really well, and it was able to solve that problem.
All right, great. Does anyone else want to chime in here? Scott, Maddie?
Actually, Hannah, let me add, since in my previous life, I used to do a lot of digital stuff. And we did digital with third world people. So we were talking about very challenged bandwidth issues. And so pre-recording, many of our smartphones have very good video capability as long as you're not trying to do it live. And so in your case, it seems very reasonable for you to pre-record a message. And it can be, again, I would counsel it, keep it short, probably 5 minutes or less, because people's attention spans are not very long. But do that and then get online onto Facebook, and you can do, text back and forth on Facebook does not require much bandwidth at all. And we know this from the third world context. So it is perfectly possible to have an interactive session that is entirely text-based. And it doesn't require much from you, nor does it require much from your parishioners. So I think there is a way to thread the needle without going to the idea of getting a better internet connection, better camera, better microphone, all of which requires a certain amount of know-how to use well. So it's not just the cash for the equipment. It's like you have to start learning how to use it well. But there are a lot of low bandwidth ways to do, I think, what you want to do, which is stay in touch.
A very easy way that you can do too is really sort of that like inspirational, motivational content. You can just ask people what's keeping them happy today. Share a moment that made you feel good today. What's keeping your spirits up this week. That's simple questions that you can ask people that doesn't even require an image or a video. You can just ask them and people can answer. In the way these social media algorithms work, if people start answering in comment, other people would start seeing it, so you'll get engagement even without your video. So that's something that I wanted to add there. And with that,
One point I'd like to make, Hannah, if I could, before we go on, it's something that I've been trying out with a few folks, and I want to share it here. We need to be thinking about physical distancing, but social connection. And you're starting to see a little bit of that start to play out. We're starting to think about how we can actually turn that into a campaign. And I think the best world for that campaign to live is in the nonprofit world, because I think it's a great message that any nonprofit could adapt to. But we need to be physically apart, but we need to be mentally and socially connected, whether it's with those that we care for in the nonprofit space or just our community, and stay relevant. So think about that as you're thinking about the different tactics that we're talking about here. How can you stay socially and emotionally connected with people? Because that's really where you're going to stand out and I think be apart from the rest. It'll help not only today, but it will help in the long term.
Yes, exactly. And then we got a question through the chat asking what bandwidth is. Really simple from my explanation. That's really just what your Wi-Fi can handle and what it cannot handle. Okay, let's move to the next question. This is from Megan Weinstein. What is the balance of raising essential operating dollars now versus actual relief dollars? We, along with many other nonprofits, are losing dollars due to lost events, etc., that don't necessarily tie back to COVID relief efforts, virtual programming, food for you, and other things. It will be important that we can pick up our important work once this passes, and continued funding will be key. I think, Michael, you can take the initial answer to this.
I'm actually going to defer to Mari on this, and then if there's anything I can add, I will, but I think this is where she's both seeing globally the reality of this, but also locally and through the fund's grantees. So Mari?
Sorry, this is Robert's question, right?
This is Megan Weinstein.
Oh, sorry, Megan. So there's complicated nonprofit accounting here, right? There's restricted funding, and then there's general operating support. And at the end of the day, many small nonprofits, there's really not that meaningful a distinction between what you need to stay alive and what you need to deliver your programs. It's like one big program. Your organization is one big program. And I think I think there is actually some careful thinking through of how you organize how you allocate costs to what you're doing, And this is obviously a conversation that gets very specific. So maybe Megan, we can talk offline about how that works. But this is a generic issue that faces pretty much every nonprofit. Being really clear about what costs you're allocating to general overhead and what costs you're allocating to program may make the difference between being able to sort of find the right balance of financing to support your organization and not. So maybe Megan, you can sort of give us a little bit more specifics, and we'll take this question offline via email or in a separate phone call.
Something small I want to add there too is, this can also tie back to what we said earlier, be open and honest about what you're facing, and you can be open and honest about the funds you're trying to raise. There's also, this is a smaller, and this is not going to be high dollar, but there's a special edition of Giving Tuesday coming up in the beginning of May. So you just really, craft actionable messaging of what you're raising money for and how that money is going to help your organization, whether that is now with COVID relief efforts or after this crisis passes with your normal operations. So it's really okay to just be communicating that and trying to raise those dollars that way.
Yeah, I will just add, it is a messaging. There's a messaging component to this too. And you are seeing lots of organizations say, we need to raise money now because we want to be there for you after this passes, because there will be an after, and you want to make sure that you're getting that messaging in now.
Yes, thanks, Mary. Another here from an anonymous attendee says, the Mutt March was a great example of an alternative virtual event. Do you have any suggestions for an alternative for a gala? I think, Michael, you can take this one.
Yeah, we're actually working with a group right now that is trying to take the Mutt March example, and they're going to talk to the Humane Society about how they did that, what they did when, and how they communicated that to their community. And it is a gala for a cancer organization, and so they are connecting together. We talk about partnerships. They're going to connect together and talk about how the staff did what when in order to transition that. But I could see the exact same effort happening where people could get dressed up at home. They could send in their photos or send in their videos and participate that way. I will also tell you, with the Humane Society, and I think with this other group that we're talking to, the sponsors are actually happy to hear that they haven't just totally canceled the event, that they're taking it online. They're getting great sponsorship out of it. Not only are they letting their dollars still stay in the donation or the sponsorship, but the company is encouraging their staff to join in where maybe they wouldn't have before, because it's a great outlet for the staff and the employees of that company to participate. So there are things like that starting to happen. I'm starting to see some unique things pop up, and maybe ways people weren't going to do it in the past, they're now going to do the connections differently. So I think if whoever asked that question, if they want to actually have an offline, please submit that, and I'm glad to walk you through or even connect you to the Humane Society director or their development director so that you can understand what they did in order to switch that. But I think the same tactics and strategies could apply.
And as an added bonus, we typically tell our clients events can be very hard to pitch to media just in general, because there are so many events every month for every organization. But when you get really creative with these events during this time, the media want to hear those stories. And so that can be added value for you to, get more participants, more donors, etc.
And on social media too, to add to that, these events can actually be a great opportunity at this time to even build out your audience. And like the Mutt March example, a lot of people probably joined in that weren't following the Humane Society before, and that got encouraged because their friends are joining in. And, the algorithm really works in your favor there. And that's just, a really good example of how you can just organically build your audience and use that positively during this time.
I'll tag on to this with just a little bit more. So what we're facing right now and what everybody's facing right now is different than anything that's ever happened before in our lifetimes. This is the time to get creative. Creativity is acceptable right now. Look, dogs are acceptable in business meetings at the, nowadays. One of the things that we've done with one of our clients, which is a local restaurant, is talk to them about ways that maybe they can help people host a virtual dinner party, that kind of thing. it doesn't really bring anything to the restaurant per se, other than the awareness that they came up with this clever idea for the community. But it again is about engagement. As much as it is about fundraising for a nonprofit, it's also about engagement. And that helps the community maintain the engagement with whatever the brand is.
All right, great. Thanks, Scott. We're moving to the next question from Robert Denvers. Says, are you seeing funders finding creative ways and actively letting grantees know that they are able and willing to help nonprofits in these days following this crisis? I think Michael and Mari can certainly chime in here.
I'm happy to go real quick. As someone who donates and finds a lot of creative ideas flowing back to me, you're seeing a lot of the organizations that Scott was talking about really get creative, and I think that's going to be key. And I also would suggest this: don't tie everything just to fundraising today. I think if you build a relationship and a connection with the community in which you would like to fundraise maybe in a week or 2 weeks from now, don't make and I know everybody needs every dollar they can get, but think about it in terms of stages. So maybe there's a way that you can start to do something creative to engage with people and then follow it up with an opportunity for them to support you. I've seen a couple of those come across my desk, and I will tell you, they get my attention. And so Mari, you may have some examples of that as well.
Sorry. I do think that things like a virtual gala will get a lot of traction, not just with earned media, but in the social media space. If you start posting photos of yourself in your finery and your friends see it, they'll be wondering why you're dressed up. And you know, it has a wonderful Instagram/Twitter, Facebook cloud associated with it. In terms of funders like us, the foundation, there are over 400 foundations that have signed on to a pledge that was put together by the Council of Foundations, expressing our intention to keep giving at the same levels that we are giving, and to support to give general operating support where we can, recognizing that this is an emergency like no other. So from the institutional side, people are in fact declaring their intent to behave differently. And I think that's actually true of individuals. I think individuals have told the Better Business Bureau that over 1/3 of individuals have said they plan to give more this year in 2020. And about half have said that they will continue to give at the same levels that they gave in 2019. And some small percentage, less than 10% of people in that survey said they would end up giving less. So I think everyone is trying their best to be helpful. Your challenge is reaching them.
All right, thanks, Mari. Let's move on to the next one, which I can take immediately since it's pertaining to social media. It says, I have heard about communications on Facebook. How about messaging on Instagram? That's a great question. Those live capabilities that I talked about, Instagram has those as well. So if your audience is bigger on Instagram, or if it's equally as big on Facebook and Instagram, you can definitely do that on Instagram as well, or explore doing it one day on Facebook and then the next day on Instagram. There's really no limit there on exploring that. Something that's a little bit harder, but you can get creative with it on Instagram, is really doing those text-based things that we talked about, just asking a question. But what you can do there is really use the Instagram stories capability and just ask a question in your story and ask people to answer that way, or do a poll in your stories. And then, you know, or encourage people to share a Bible passage on their story, or an inspirational message on their story, and then you can share their stories on your story and really show community source stories. So that's a great capability. Facebook has stories as well, but they don't reach nearly as many people there. So where you do a question in a Facebook text post, you can do it on Instagram in a story. And then of course, any photo-based posts that we're talking about, any video-based posts that we talked about, those can all go on Instagram as well, since it's a very visual platform.
So this is just a time check. It's 12:32, and it looks like we've mostly answered the questions. Is that right, Hannah?
Yeah, the other ones were just, you know, comments on things that we were talking about. Like someone said that this is not a crisis of our making, so it's okay to ask for support for operations. And there are individual and companies that are understanding of this at this time, which is definitely something that we've seen for all our clients as well. It is okay to ask, and people understand. So that was a really great comment. And then the other ones, Michael, that linked back to what you were saying, you know, they're saying they're using the term physically separate, but socially cohesive. So really like that. Someone asked about our email, which should be up on the screen right now. And I think then we've answered everything. Let me just do a quick check in the chat to make sure there's nothing else in the chat. Oh, there's one more question. Do we want to bring it in? It says, while not always the case, while a Zoom conference can see to have no costs associated with it, there is the additional planning, coordination, and follow-up, especially if there's a polling and decision-making process, plus a report developed with action plan for follow-up. How can we best communicate those real costs to funders?
I think I'll handle that because we actually dealt with that with the month March. As they were changing, there were some expenses went down because it wasn't a physical expense, but some expenses that weren't expected did go up a little bit because it was a virtual and they weren't expecting to have to deal with that. So we were just very candid. We called all of our sponsors. They touched base with all of their major donors and were very upfront and clear about how the budget needed to shift, and everybody understood. I think people today are more understanding than ever before, as long as you are transparent, clear, open with them, and get to them early on. Calling them the day before, if the event's on a Saturday, calling them on Friday doesn't work. So there does need to be some real cohesive planning and thought to go into it. And that's what I think is the biggest takeaway from all of this today is planning and thinking ahead in order to be able to make sure you're successful with whatever type of communication or fundraising or combination thereof that you're going to be doing. So with that, I'll let Mari close us out completely, but I just want to thank you on behalf of the team from the Dalton Agency. This was a big effort for all of us to be able to work very closely with the fund. We're very appreciative that they've allowed us to be here today and share our thoughts. We are all like you at home, working very hard, but we felt very strongly and passionately that we wanted to share with you some ideas that could benefit you. We're going to share this deck so that hopefully it'll spark some good thoughts on your end. We're here. You see Scott's email. Feel free to load his inbox up. You're welcome, Scott. And we're here to help. We enjoy being part of the fund. We enjoy the partnership that we have, and that's why we wanted to bring this to you today. So thank you very much. Having 176 people join in was amazing. So Mari, with that, I'll kick it over to you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Maddie. Thank you, Hannah. And thank you, Scott, for this incredibly informative session. And if there were any sort of other questions that came up, feel free to email Scott, but feel free to email your program officers. We know how to get in touch with the Dalton Agency, and we look forward to continuing this conversation. I hope it was useful. Thank you.